Welcome, my darlings, to my humble chateau. Please make yourself very comfortable. Relax your mind and release your imagination to me. I will bring you a story to entrance and entertain. Perhaps a frightening one. Perhaps a steampunk. Perhaps a bit of mythology. Anyway, sit back, enjoy, and subscribe to me. The Cat by Belle. My harvest was small that year. I don't have a big farm, only a few acres, some chickens, a few sheep. The llama I picked up a few years back. Mostly I grow pumpkins, though. I sell them to the local market. It's not a huge income, but it's enough. And I've never been as happy as I am when I'm on the farm. I love the earth and the air. The summers have been lasting longer, though, and the drought has set in. The sun rose early and beat down during the day, harsh and ever-present. Shade offered no relief. My sheep wilted. My chickens stopped laying. Times had been hard. Not just for me, either. The neighbors down the left of me were struggling, and the ones on the right had to declare bankruptcy and move to the city a year or two ago. I visited them last year in their small, smog-filled apartment and resolved to hold out until the very end in my earth and air. Not long after, a cat appeared in my yard. She was small, clearly a runt, who was now malnourished. She prowled silently across my deck. As I stood there, she paused. Her small, pointed face turned and stared at me, and in that moment the sun caught her. Her yellow-green eyes seemed to glow as the light reflected over her black fur. The colors seemed almost too vivid, and I felt a moment of lightness before the heat seemed to suddenly turn up. Dizzy and overcome by this sensation, I retreated inside for water. When I returned, the cat was gone. That night, 3 chickens died. The sun was glaring by the time I found them. I would have said it was the cat if they'd been eaten. As it was, they were pristine in their death, untouched. I do not think I'll ever know how they died. A few days later, the cat returned. Once again she stalked through my garden, and once again I was stricken by how small she was. If she had stood still, I was sure I would have been able to count her ribs. It soon became apparent that she was living under my house. Being the bleeding heart that I am, I decided to lay out food for her. More and more I saw the cat, and soon I was leaving food out for her regularly. I decided to befriend her. I hoped to bring her inside, into my home. She seemed like a sweet cat, and at the very least she would help keep the mice down. That is why we domesticated cats to begin with. Each morning I would feed the chickens, tend to the sheep, check on the one llama, and see to my vegetables. I would then put some food out and wait in the hot sun, burning silently. Soon enough, the cat would emerge. At first timidly, but after only a few weeks she became bold. This seemed to suit her. She began to put on weight. Her fur shone. She began to purr. After a few months, she seemed a part of my household. One night, I found myself awake and overheated in my PJs and bed sheets. Groggily, I went to the kitchen for water. In my stupor, I found myself suddenly anxious, overcome with the sensation of being watched. The hairs on my neck prickled. It was then that I saw her, the cat. In the darkness of my hallway, she seemed almost invisible, except for her small, pointed face. Her yellow-green eyes shone. The whites of her teeth gleamed. The red of her mouth was mesmerizing in the blackness. Her jaw hung slack. Once again I felt the sensation of being suddenly light, like I'd been under a great pressure that was now relieved. So suddenly my body could not adjust, and I was left in discomfort. I felt as though I was suspended, my cells barely hanging together. At any moment, the boundaries of my body would dissolve, and I would drift into nothingness. A deep, rumbling voice emanated from the cat, though her mouth did not move, and her eyes never left mine. The words seemed to vibrate within me. The house seemed to shake. She said only 2 words. "Thank you." The feeling of lightness seemed to shatter then. Terrified, I ran. I never saw the cat again. This year, my crop was bountiful. So quoth this raven. Belle, the Blind Doll by Colourblindness. My daughter Claire was diagnosed with macular degeneration at the age of 6. I've always been very open with my daughter about life in general, so I didn't hide this unfortunate news from her, but instead decided to work my hardest to prepare her for a life with this disability. Claire was scared, of course, as any 6-year-old would be. "Mama, will I lose my sight before the next snowfall?" she asked me timidly. It was only September, and the doctor gave her until January. Still, I didn't want to get her hopes up too much, so I told her we would leave it in God's hands. In the meantime, I read every book and blog about helping a child to cope with blindness, and that's how I found out about Blind Belle. It was a doll manufactured by a private company that said they only made them for special circumstances, and that all funds would go towards other children with similar conditions. Despite the odd name, I did actually think that the doll looked somewhat pleasant. It was a small rag doll, about the size of an average teddy bear, wearing a blue church dress, and had blonde hair and blue eyes. She had a nice smile and, according to the webpage, had a built-in voice box that say certain phrases so that your child won't feel lonely or lost. I'd planned to buy her a new doll for Christmas, but as time slipped by, I realized that the doctor's initial diagnosis was wrong, and she wouldn't be able to wait until then. So I went ahead and ordered it, hoping to surprise her around Thanksgiving. Sadly, though, when the box came in, I was the one shocked to see that the doll was badly damaged. Her stitching looked ripped and her clothes faded, her hair a dirty color, and worst of all, someone had taken the blue button eyes out. I wanted to get a refund on it right away. But every time I tried to contact customer service, the line would be busy. Frustrated that I had been scammed, I placed it down on the couch and went to cook dinner to get my mind off things. A few moments later, I heard Claire squeal with delight, and I looked in the living room and saw her playing with the doll. "Mama, you got me my own special friend. Oh, thank you, Mama, thank you," she said as she happily danced. I saw tears welling up in her eyes, just barely, and I realized that her sight was almost gone. She couldn't tell what bad condition the doll was really in. I didn't have the heart to correct her, so I let her keep it. I figured that I'd be able to sew her up and make her as good as new. But Claire almost never let her leave her side. "Why don't you let me hold her?" I suggested one day. "You can't. Then she'd forget about me, and she'll be lonely," Claire said desperately. I couldn't argue with that. Still, some of what Blind Belle said had started to bother me. "Don't ever leave me," she would say sometimes when I walked by Claire's room. "Don't be afraid of the dark. I'll be right here," she said when I tucked Claire into bed. I thought once my daughter was asleep, I could take the time to get the doll and maybe clean it up. I knew I'd have to take the electronic components out and hand wash it, but still, if we were going to keep the thing, I knew it needed to be done. I snuck into her room to take Belle to the washer, and I heard that voice again. "I see you," Belle said softly. I froze and looked at the doll. The voice sounded even more unnatural than before. I reached to grab it up when she started making soft melody. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Claire woke up and started crying. "Don't take her away, Mommy, you can't," my daughter cried. I relented and went back to bed. I heard a soft laugh come from the doll as I left the room. I lay in bed thinking of that strange blind doll and trying to push my unease aside. I wanted Claire to be happy. I wanted her to just have a normal life. And maybe I was overreacting about the doll anyway. In the morning, I decided it was time to convince Claire to let me have her. I kept the room dark for a minute as I walked to where my little girl slept. I've done this for a while, since she lost her sight, to try and get a feel of the world the way she does. It felt wet. Something was right against her cheek and eyes. I turned on the light and screamed in horror. My little girl was lying there, her eyes ripped from her skull. The scream only became louder when I heard Belle giggle, and I saw Claire's blue eyes staring at me from within her stitching. "I see you, Mama." So quoth this raven. Please like and subscribe, and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And leave me a comment and I'll try and comment back. If you really enjoy Madame's page, please share this video so that others can find me as well. Bye-bye, my darlings.